On June 29th, 2010, Elena Kagan had been nominated to the Supreme Court, and as she was going through her Senate judiciary hearings, Lindsey Graham asked her, "Where were you on Christmas Day?" And she started to give a long answer, and Lindsey Graham just said, "No, I'm just asking you, where were you on Christmas Day?" And her answer was this, quote, "Like all Jews, I was probably at a Chinese restaurant," unquote. And the idea was she was a Jewish person, that she didn't celebrate Christmas, so she was probably at the only place that was open, some Chinese restaurant. We understand that not all people in America celebrate Christmas, but you might be surprised that 96% of Americans do. 96% of Americans celebrate Christmas. A 2012 Pew poll found that 76% of Buddhists celebrate Christmas and 73% of Hindus do. 32% of American Jews had a Christmas tree in their home. 65% of American Christians, when you ask American Christians, 65% of them said that they felt like Christmas was a religious holiday. So there's very strong feelings about Christmas in America. But maybe you know a few Christians who don't celebrate Christmas at all. They don't participate in any way at all. And they have reasons for why they don't. Some of them are really, really good reasons. Some of them are somewhat lacking. And I say that only because I stumbled on a website where it gave 135 reasons why Christians should not be celebrating Christmas. And some of them were okay, and some of them were very, very silly. And so some people don't have great reasons for it. But most might take for granted that we celebrate Christmas. And so it'd be good to just consider our celebration of Christmas. If it's right to celebrate, then we want to do it right. And if it's wrong to celebrate Christmas, then we, even as fun as it is, shouldn't do that. And so let's look at this tonight. So let's first of all ask the question about celebrating holidays in general. Now, I'm borrowing a little bit from my message on Halloween, which is why we're in Colossians chapter 2. Notice in Colossians 2, verse 16, where it says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day," or we wouldn't say holy day, we would shorten it up and say holiday, which is the same idea, but this idea of a holy day, or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. So no one is to judge us as Christians in the celebration of holidays. Now, the holidays they're talking about here specifically, or holy days, were ones that were actually commanded by God in the Old Testament. God said you are to celebrate, like, for instance, the new moon, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Passover, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Trumpets. All these things, when they come, you look at the moon. This is when you do it. This is according to the calendar when you do it. And God commanded these holidays. But of course, what Paul's trying to say in Colossians, and you know this because we went through Colossians, is that, well, Christ has fulfilled the law. He's fulfilled all of these Old Testament regulations, and so we don't need, for instance, the Passover because Christ is our Passover. And that's a wonderful truth of Scripture. But apparently there were some in the Colossian church who were insisting that they should be celebrated because they're biblical. Well, why would we just not celebrate these things if God commanded them in the Old Testament? Perhaps there were some in the church that were insisting that they not be celebrated. Not only do I feel like this is a Christian liberty issue, but I think it's actually wrong. I think it's actually anti-Christian to celebrate, for instance, the Passover. I don't think you should do that. They would say it is a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. And so they would say, no, we should not do this. To do it is to say that Christ has not fulfilled his part, perhaps. Now, Paul had scolded the Galatians about somewhat this very thing. He said in Galatians 4, verses 9 through 10, But now after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire to be again into bondage? Ye observe days and months and times and years. Now, Paul's saying in Galatians that to celebrate days and months and times and years is quote unquote weak and beggarly. But of course, we understand that something else is going on in Galatians. It's not just the celebrating of holidays. It's that they were going full on back to the Jewish laws. And believe it or not, I'm hearing more and more people, mostly in our community, maybe there are more online. Honestly, I don't really do a lot of forums of Christians, but I'm meeting more and more people that are very much into the Jewish ceremonial law and call themselves Christians. There is kind of this upward trend of that. And I couldn't really say what accounts for it, except that maybe there is something within us that when we worship wants to do something. We want to have some kind of commands in our life. And not only that, but there is something within us. And I'm not castigating every single person who, as a Christian, is going back to some of the Jewish law. I'm not trying to anyway. But there is something in us that feels like we're better than somebody else because we're keeping a law that other people have discarded, Christians. So, for instance, there are people in our church that don't eat pork just because they think pork is gross. But there are some Christians out there that feel like God said, don't do it. And so there's probably something to pork that you shouldn't eat, and that's fine. But then there are some people who say, no, God forbade pork, and there's nothing that says that eating pork is okay now. And so they refuse to and won't have anything to do with that at all. So I think that's kind of more what's going on here in Galatians, that he's not just saying you're celebrating these feasts and holidays, but you're doing it in a way that is very much going back to the Jewish faith when you don't need to do that. You should not do that. We talked about this already in the Sunday school hour, but Paul says the law, all those things in the law were meant to be a schoolmaster or the bus driver, I said this morning in Sunday school, to bring you to Jesus Christ. And so the feast, all those things, yes, they point to Jesus. But they were at least being talked about in the early church. Now go over to Romans chapter 14, and we see this again. So there's the principle. He says, don't let anyone judge you in these things, which again, in some ways, doesn't it leave it to open to interpretation? Don't let anyone judge you. He doesn't say, if you'd like to, don't let anyone judge you. He doesn't say, if you'd like not to, don't let anyone judge you. He just says, let no one judge you in these things. And then in Romans chapter 14, he says, him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. Don't fight with people about things that are not certain, they're doubtful. For one Christian believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another. Another man esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks, and he that eateth not, to the Lord he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. Now again, in the context, he's talking about not imposing things that are open to Christian liberty. You can or don't have to live like this. And he's saying, don't let that become a cause of strife among you. He's also saying that both sides are valid. In this case, he doesn't even say who the weaker brother is, who is regarding the day or not, or regarding every day alike. Someone who's like, I don't believe in holidays, I don't celebrate them, they're all the same. And other brothers who are like, yeah, there are certain special days, and I want to regard them. And so he's not saying which one is right, because I think both of them are equally valid, which means, again, as far as we are concerned, we have Christian liberty to celebrate holidays or special days. Verse number 13, let us not therefore judge one another anymore, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way. So let's say, so maybe you know this, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays or Christmases and probably some other holidays too, but those are the two I'm mostly concerned with, okay? So let's say, wouldn't it be great if we had a Jehovah's Witness come into our church and they got saved, right? But their whole life they'd learned, don't celebrate birthdays, right? And here's Stan, and he's sitting there, and it's his birthday. And we all know that. I probably wouldn't. Hey, it's Stan's birthday, everybody. Let's sing happy birthday to Stan. Why? Because that would, whereas it might just be kind of embarrassing, a little nice, to most people, to him, he would really feel like he's sinning by making his birthday a big deal. Not because it is a sin, but because he has a conscience that's been conditioned by a different understanding, maybe wrong, maybe right, but it would be good for us as a church to respect that because it's not a biblical issue and say, we care about you so much that we don't want you to stumble, we don't want you to be offended in your walk with the Lord, and so we're going to forbear that. And that's Paul's heart here. Whether you celebrate it or don't celebrate it, you shouldn't look down on somebody who doesn't celebrate Christmas. You shouldn't look down on somebody who does celebrate Christmas. These holidays he's talking about, again, at least had some kind of biblical precedent because they were commanded in the Old Testament. Celebration of holidays does have significance, okay? We understand that, maybe you understand this, maybe you don't. If you have, do you know that like every day is some kind of day? Like, I don't know when guacamole day is. There's a guacamole day, there's an artichoke day, there's a spaghetti squash day, there's a chipmunk day, there is a white African elephant day. There's all kinds of, Asian sea otter day. There's all kinds of those days every single day. And if you celebrate a holiday, you're giving credence if you regard it. So that's the thing. There's a lot of days that happen every day. Tomorrow is December 4th. You know what December 4th is? I don't, okay? Today's December 3rd, and unless your name's Silas Carter, it's not that big of a deal. It's just another December 3rd, okay? You just go with it. It might be for you significant. Maybe that was the day that a loved one passed, or it was, someone who had passed their birthday, and you regarded it. That's what the word that Paul uses here. You set out special significance. You celebrated it. So like January 3rd is when my mom passed away. I have her teacup that I got that she always had tea in. And on January 30th, I make a cup of English tea and drink that. And that's kind of the way I regard the day. I don't mope around all day. I don't dress in black. I might watch a little slideshow, but that's just, I have a little thing that I do. Mom's birthday was the same as Caleb's, and so that's that's always been kind of a special day too, that I can do that. But maybe there's something where you regard the day. That's fine. But understand that when you regard it, you're giving credence to the specialness of that day. So again, maybe you do, maybe you don't care about National Chihuahua Day, which is May 14th. Maybe you don't care about National Crepes Day on February 2nd, or National Zebra Day on January 31st. Maybe you didn't even know that September 12th was National Report Medicare Fraud Day. Roxanne did, but nobody else did. But you do know certain ones, and you do maybe something about that. So for me, again, I'm not a veteran. I have friends, my father, others that are veterans, and I appreciate that. But I'm not a veteran, and so I don't get together with my veteran friends. I don't call them. I don't really celebrate it in the way that other people maybe would. Certain ones I would. Birthdays. Again, so there's something about a significance. It's Silas Carter's birthday, and so we recognized it. That was our extent of regarding it. Hey, Silas, happy birthday. It was Paul Utke's birthday, so I sent him a text this morning. Hey, happy birthday. And that was the extent of my regarding it. But I'm taking a moment to say this is a special day. Now, when you celebrate it in some way, you're giving credence, little or big. If you send a text, it's probably a little, just an affirmation. I'm celebrating it in my own way. But then you could go, of course, bigger. So when you are celebrating it, you're giving credence to the message that that holiday says. And sometimes that's fine, like a birthday or National Chihuahua Day, I guess. But sometimes it's not a message that you want to put out there. Like we now have a Gay Pride Month, right? And National Atheist Day on March 23rd. It would be wrong for you to celebrate that, to give some kind of credence to National Atheist Day. Or the November 29th, we just passed it, the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People. Not interested in celebrating that because I don't want to give credence to what that stands for. So there's a way that, again, you have days all around you. They're slipping through the time stream on the calendar. There's no way you could celebrate every special holiday. You pick the ones that are special and you regard it in some way. Or you don't. Okay? So it behooves us then to examine the holidays that we celebrate and ask, what are we celebrating? Is there a consistent message? What are we saying when we are celebrating that? So let's talk specifically then about, that's the principle. Let's talk then about Christmas itself. Is it worth celebrating? Now the word Christmas it has come to us because originally it was the Christ Mass. It was a Catholic celebration, the Catholic Mass. It's the Christ Mass. And that's how we've come to use that moniker. It could be Nativity Day, it could be a lot of other things, Incarnation Day, but it just has come to us by Christ Mass. And that's a real problem for some people, that it has something to do with the Catholic Church, that word, that Christ Mass. And so a lot of people, they don't like Christmas for that reason alone. Again, there's 135 on this one website that I found. They're going to go, oh, it's a Catholic thing, and so we don't want to celebrate that. Well, honestly, we go to church on Sunday. I don't feel like we're worshiping the sun. If we had church on the next day, on Moon Day, I don't think we'd be celebrating the moon. You know, there's all kinds of things that we could give credence to, but we don't have to. We don't have to regard the day. We meet on Sunday because it's the first day of the week, and that's what the early church did. And so that's when we celebrate the resurrection and meet together, and we give credence to it in that way. So just because it has a name that everybody's used to doesn't totally get rid of that. It's the message behind it. And the early church had different feasts that they celebrated. Some of the early church said that the Jewish feasts were bad to celebrate. And the reason is that the Jewish people had really persecuted Christians, and the Jewish people were being persecuted by, for instance, the Roman Empire, and Christians wanted to distance themselves from the Jewish people to say, we're a separate and distinct group, and one of the ways to make that distinction clear was by not celebrating the Jewish feasts. And so early Christians, by and large, didn't. But they did celebrate Jesus' resurrection. Now, when did they celebrate it? They celebrated it on, they figured out, okay, when's the spring equinox? It's the first Sunday after the spring equinox. And early Christians used to fast on that Friday and Saturday and then come together for a meal on that Sunday. And that's just kind of when they decided it was kind of a floating day when Jesus' resurrection, which we call Easter or Resurrection Sunday, when that would be celebrated. Irenaeus said in AD 180 that they couldn't convince Polycarp to move it to that date, that first Sunday after the spring equinox. They couldn't convince Polycarp to move it from 14 Nisan. Now, what's 14 Nisan? 14 Nisan is the 14th day of the first month, which is when Passover was. You know what that tells me? So who's Polycarp? Again, I'm maybe getting all jumbled here, but Polycarp was a disciple of John. the apostle. So from early on, they were celebrating Jesus' resurrection, and Polycarp was always celebrating it on whatever day Passover was. And Irenaeus said that some other Christians were trying to convince him to move it to this first Sunday after the spring equinox just to make some distance, and they weren't able to do that. But Polycarp did it because that's when John celebrated it, from early on. Again, this isn't biblical. The Bible doesn't come right out and say this is when we're celebrating the Lord's Supper or the resurrection. But from historical records, early Christians celebrated it on 14 Nisan, or the Passover. In AD 195, again, very early, AD 195, Clement of Alexandria said that they were celebrating Jesus' birth in some way. Clement says that they celebrated in the spring, though, and not in the winter. They were, and the early church, Clement says, was very careful to not celebrate pagan feasts. Whenever the pagan feast came up, Christians were very careful to say, this is not what we're celebrating. We're not interested in that. Now later, the church tried to figure out, well, when should we celebrate Jesus' birth? And this is very complicated, but do you remember in Luke chapter 1 where Zacharias goes into the temple? Well, it says that he was in the band of Abiah. Okay? Well, they were pretty close to the source, so they could actually work back when that band of Abiah was supposed to go. And they figured out that it was in September. Okay, Zacharias was in the temple in September. 6 months later is when Mary got the news that she was going to have a baby. 6 months after September is March. And they figured March 25th. Early on, Christians said, we think it's about March 25th is when the Annunciation, the announcement to Mary came by the angel Gabriel. And then you just do the math. 9 months after the Annunciation is December 25th. And that's where the early church got this date. Again, it's somewhat arbitrary because Mary didn't update her Facebook profile, just gave birth to the Son of God on December 25th. And so it was really, in a way, arbitrary because Christians were saying, well, we want to celebrate Jesus' birth. We don't know when, but we think historically it was around probably this time. Christians had different debates, but the point is that they did try to work out when to celebrate. And it came to be that December 25th came to be more of the popular date with the Julian calendar than others. And there were some, again, early on, John Chrysostom, Augustine, Jerome, all celebrated it on then. And then in 336, Constantine, the Roman emperor, came to power, and he established Christianity as the state religion, which was a terrible thing for him to do in a way, but at least it ended the persecution. But he also put all these things in stone, including we are going to celebrate Jesus' birth on December 25th for the whole empire. Now, here are some of the objections that people have to celebrating Christmas on December 25th. I heard it's a pagan holiday. Now, some people have claimed that it was Mithras. Mithras was this ancient demigod or god that was supposedly born of a virgin and born on December 25th. But the more digging you go into that, if anyone ever says, well, it's a pagan holiday, Mithras, just point out to them that Mithras didn't come about until after Jesus' birth. So if anybody borrowed from anybody, it was Mithras borrowing from what the Christians were saying about Jesus. And there's no evidence that he was virgin born. That is something, has been something that atheists and others have made up to make it seem like Christianity is just borrowing from all these pagan religions. Some have said that this idea of Christmas, even I read a Newsweek article that said that Christmas started in the ancient Roman Empire with a holiday called Saturnalia, which was a huge drinking festival. The only problem is that Saturnalia, from all we know, from all we can tell, started on December 17th. Or at the very least, or at the very latest, December 23rd. So even that does not hold up as a pagan holiday. The early Christians knew about these feasts, like the Feast of Saturnalia, and they didn't celebrate them. They were very careful to distance themselves from it. So to say this was a Catholic church taking these pagan things, there's just no evidence that that's exactly what happened with Christmas or December 25th. Now, I'm not saying that the Catholic Church doesn't do that. They have historically taken pagan holidays and said, well, we'll just make them Christian. They've done that. And there may very well be some of that in December 25th and the birth of Jesus Christ. But there's no real evidence that that's what's going on here. Now, let me ask some other questions. Well, what if it was a pagan holiday originally? The heart of the holiday is the message, not the date. Yes, it very well could be that December 25th was some pagan holiday. Does that follow that we have to not celebrate anything on December 25th? Well, like I said, there's 365 a year, and probably somewhere, some god is being celebrated on some day. Hindu, Roman at the time, Greek or otherwise. Somewhere, somebody's celebrating a god on the day, and to say, well, we can't have celebrating Jesus on the same day as a god, you're going to run out of days. So the heart of the holiday is the message and the point, not just the date. Paul in Acts chapter 18, verse 21 says, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem. He was celebrating not a pagan holiday, but the Jewish holiday. It was no longer about keeping the law, because Paul, if anybody knew, you don't have to keep the law, and yet he was saying, I really want to go and celebrate, keep, regard, somehow celebrate this feast in Jerusalem. It wasn't about keeping the law. It was about something else, something that was significant to him. Again, what I'm saying is it's not about the date. It's not about, oh, this is the day, and if something happened on that day, we can't do anything about that. Paul was still celebrating these feasts, even on the days, but it had a different significance to him. So that leaves a question, is it possible then to redeem or clean up a holiday? You're in Romans 14. Look over at Acts chapter 20. Luke is describing where they went in verse 13 and in verse 14. Verse 15, we sailed thence and came the next day into Chios, and the next day we arrived in Samos and tarried to Trogyllium, and the next day we came to Miletus, for Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. Pentecost had become not just a Jewish holiday, but the birthday of the church. So in some way, again, I don't know what Paul wanted to do in Jerusalem on Pentecost, but he wanted to celebrate it. He wanted to be there in time for it. Now, did he want to celebrate the Old Testament Feast of Weeks? Maybe. Did he want to celebrate the birth of the church? Maybe. But there was something about that where he wasn't afraid of the day of Pentecost. He still was able to celebrate it. So we could say, possibly, you could redeem some holiday. Now, is it true that every holiday can be redeemed? I'm not saying can you not celebrate something on the same day, but the actual holiday, the actual message. Some holidays, like Halloween, retain so many symbols from the past that it's really hard to redeem. Like Halloween is very much about death. It's very much about spirits. And that very thing is a very hard thing for us as Christians to overcome. Now, some Christians can. They celebrate the eve of All Saints' Day, and they say All Saints' Day. But again, we even think about saints in a different way than the Roman Catholic Church or other Christians do. So I personally don't see how Halloween could be redeemed. You can't redeem Atheist Day because of what it means, the message. Now, you can celebrate something else on Atheist Day, but you can't redeem that holiday. So, is it possible that we could still celebrate Christmas? You say, well, what if there's so much confusion about Christmas and December 25th. I want to celebrate Jesus' birth, but not on December 25th because of all the pagan things. Again, I don't think that I don't think the receipts are there for saying that December 25th was a pagan holiday. But let's say, well, let's celebrate it in September. Okay, great. That's fine. If culture understood it to be something different, then we could change it. If December 25th came to be something that was really wicked, somehow in our culture, December 25th, let's say you go to be a missionary in Western Samoa, and you come and you go on the island and find out that September 25th is the day where they make a human sacrifice. And what they do to make that human sacrifice is they have a tree and they decorate it. Maybe don't celebrate Christmas on December 25th. If you're in Western Samoa as a missionary, you would say, this holiday means something completely different to these people. And so, yes, I'm going to celebrate that in a different way. Okay, sure, you can celebrate Jesus' birth on a different day. Since we don't know, it could be any day of the year. It could be in June, right? June 9th is a great day to do that. That's my birthday. No, you could do it anytime, right? It doesn't matter. So let's ask another question. Is it important to celebrate Jesus' birth? Let me say, first of all, the Bible never commands that we should celebrate Jesus' birth. The Bible never forbids that we should celebrate Jesus' birth. So the Bible doesn't have the answer to that. Let's also say, though, that Christmas is more than a birthday, right? It's not the same. Jesus is not the founder of our religion. We don't look at Jesus in the same way that Mormons look at Joseph Smith, right? We're not celebrating like we do George Washington, the birthday of our founding father. We don't think of Jesus that way. One, because we think of him as eternal. He is the Son of God. Birthday is a wonderful thing, but it's not quite the same thing that we're talking about when we say birthday. So that's different. Christmas is celebrating something more significant than a mere birthday of someone who's important to us. He's the Son of God. And what we understand Christmas to be is more than just a birthday. It was the implementation of the plan of God to redeem us. And that's why so many of our songs reflect that. Born that man no more may die. That's the whole reason he was born, so that he could bring redemption to us. And so it's much more than just a birthday. It's the incarnation, which again, if you want to call it Incarnation Day, that's fine. People maybe wouldn't know what you're talking about, but that's at least something theologically rich that the New Testament does talk about. The Bible does not look at the incarnation as something that's easily dismissed. 1 Timothy 3:16, God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed unto the world, received up into glory. It's significant that God was manifest in the flesh. Galatians 4 and 5, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. He was born so that we could be adopted. That's wonderful. 1 John 4, verse 9, and this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. Again, the purpose of God sending his Son into the world tied with good for us. John 1:14, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So while maybe a birthday is not worth celebrating, the incarnation, the plan of God set into motion in that manger, absolutely is worth celebrating. Now let's talk then finally about the Christian and cultural holidays. It would be a different debate living in a culture that doesn't celebrate Christmas at all. Again, you go to a place and they don't have any context for Christmas. India, some island nation, maybe even a Muslim country where they don't understand what Christmas is. That would be a question to be like, do I celebrate this or not? We're going to talk about how to celebrate Christmas next week. But maybe that tying together with Christmas and December 25th and Jesus' birth doesn't need to be everything that we make it to be. And I'm only saying it this way. What if it wasn't a Christian holiday? What if it was just a day in America where we decorated, we put up lights, we put up a garland, we put up a tree, we gave gifts to each other? What if it was just a holiday like that? And what if we called it something totally different? I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying, what if December 25th was Tree Day? And everybody in America, 96% of people celebrated Tree Day, and it was just kind of a fun day to give gifts to each other. Would we as Christians be like, no, I can't celebrate that? Well, no, because there's nothing wrong with the message of a tree. Maybe we wouldn't even know where the tree came from, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was Peace and Goodwill Day. Would that be all right to celebrate Peace and Goodwill Day in the way that we're celebrating Christmas? Sure. There's nothing wrong with it, right? We celebrate nation holidays as Christians. We feel free to celebrate Labor Day, even though I've never been a part of a labor union. President's Day, even though I don't think we've had particularly great presidents. We've had some great ones. I celebrate Veterans Day, even though I'm not a veteran. Celebrate Memorial Day, even though I don't have, as far as I know, any family members that have died in service to our country. Celebrate Patriot Day, 9/11. We celebrate Independence Day, and we don't balk at that, even though it has nothing to do with Christ. It has nothing to do with the church. It has nothing to do with the Bible. We also celebrate virtue holidays. On Valentine's Day, we celebrate love, and that's a good thing. That's something that the Bible does talk about. We celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day, and that's a good thing to celebrate the role of parents in our lives. We celebrate Thanksgiving. All of those things are worth celebrating, right? And so, is it okay to celebrate peace on earth, goodwill to men? Now, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it should only be that, but I'm asking, if it was only that, if December 25th was Peace on Earth, Goodwill to Men Day, well, would we as a Christian celebrate it? I think part of the reason that people get so uptight about celebrating or not celebrating Christmas is they want it to be a perfect holiday, a perfect matching of Jesus' birth and everything else, and they want to get rid of everything else. And I'm saying, is it okay if it's just a day where we celebrate good things? And at the same time, we as Christians are also saying, and this is a day we celebrate Jesus' coming to earth and the plan of redemption. Is it okay that we would do that? And I don't see a reason to say no. Because there's no message in Christmas that is saying it is good to celebrate paganness. It is good to celebrate something that the Bible calls reprehensible. You say, well, is there any evidence of people in the Bible? Okay, well, let me say this. You would probably say it depends on what we're celebrating, right? You're like, if you say I am celebrating the coming of Christ, that's a good thing. But if it was just gift giving, that would be okay too. If there was just, again, if we in American culture, there was just a day where we gave gifts to each other, that'd be fine. Now, as soon as you attach something to that, like, for instance, March 11th is Worship of Tools Day, where you go into your garage and worship your tools. Well, I'm not going to celebrate that because that would be wrong. But if it was just a gift-giving day, I would say, well, sure, Christians are free to celebrate that. So why is it all of a sudden that Christmas is one of these things that we question? Is there any evidence of people celebrating non-biblical holidays? Well, there's one that I could think of, and it was John chapter 20, verse 22, where Jesus was in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication. You know what the Feast of Dedication is? It's Hanukkah. Like, well, Hanukkah, that's a Jewish holiday. Yeah, it's a Jewish holiday, but it's not commanded in the Old Testament. The Feast of Hanukkah came in that intertestamental time, the Maccabean period, where the Maccabeans took over Jerusalem from the Greeks and from the Seleucids, and they got their country back, and they built the temple again, and there's a whole big story and everything, but it wasn't something biblical, it was something historical, and Jesus was there for the Feast of Dedication. Most of the Roman festivals were to Roman gods, as opposed to some historical commemoration, and so we're not going to find any Christians celebrating secular holidays, because there really weren't any. All of them had to do with gods, and Christians were going to stay as far away from that as possible. So if you could convince me that somehow Christianity celebrated another God, and some people try, right, in their blogs, oh, it's celebrating these other gods and these wreaths and all these things. We'll talk about that next week. But if you could convince me that it was a celebration of another God or worship of something that was not God, then I would forbear. I just don't think that's really what's going on here. If we say as Christians, we're celebrating the birth of Christ, his coming into this world, isn't that okay? Isn't that okay to celebrate that and to give gifts to one another? Because that's another thing people have. We'll talk about this next week. But the idea that, oh, why would you give gifts to each other if it's all about Jesus? Because there's joy in gift giving. There's something good about that. And is there anything wrong with that? I know that we can make it all about the gifts and we can make it all about those things. And we should keep the focus on Christ in anything that we do. You know, tomorrow's a Monday. We should focus on Christ on Mondays. Tuesdays are a great day to focus on Christ too, and so are Wednesdays. You know, it would be a great way to focus on Christ is to be in a prayer meeting on Wednesday night. So there's all kinds of ways to do that. But we're talking about Christmas here because it apparently becomes very controversial. Now, we're living in America where Christmas is a part of everything. Again, 96%. I had no idea it was that high. 96% of Americans celebrate Christmas. And the reason that we do as a nation, by and large, the reason that banks it's like the one day of the year that some places are closed. There's no other day but Christmas Day they're closed. Why? Because we have a Judeo-Christian heritage. Because our country was based in Judeo-Christian ethics. And so that influence is here. Everybody does it. Now, even as I say that, Christmas is losing its religious affiliation. I told you that in 2012, 65% of Americans said that they felt like Christmas was a Christian holiday. In 2017, 5 years later, it had dropped 10% to 55%. 55% of Americans in 2017 said that Christmas was a religious holiday. So it is becoming more secularized. Does that mean that we as Christians shouldn't celebrate it? Well, again, there are all kinds of other secular holidays that we celebrate. It may be too bad, but we're regarding the day in our own way. And if you do that, and you can do that with a clean conscience and not look down on somebody else, then I think you should. You say, well, if it loses its connection with Christ, should we not celebrate Christmas? It's hard to say how it could lose its affiliation at all. But Christians are allowed to celebrate it. There's no law saying, no, you cannot celebrate Christmas. There may come a day when Christmas will someday be totally different from a Christian holiday. And at that point, when Christmas has taken on pagan overtones, the message is atheistic or pagan or worshiping some other god, then at that point, we as Christians can have that conversation. But from everything you could see, and thinking about this in a real and rational way, Christmas does not have those affiliations. If anybody finds out that you're celebrating Christmas, they're going to assume you're doing it because you're a Christian and you're celebrating the advent or the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Now, there are right ways to celebrate it and there are wrong ways to celebrate it. So we'll talk about this next week. But just something to think about. Is it okay for us to celebrate Christmas? I sure hope so. Roxanne doesn't want to come in tomorrow and take everything down. I think it is not only okay, but it's a good thing for us to celebrate Jesus' incarnation. And however you do it, we'll talk about that. However you do it, you can honor the Lord with that.